Today's share and care is about how the scapulas are almost like bevel gears. You know, their drivers are from somewhere deeply internal. Anyways, welcome to this open discussion. I'm just walk around, and the thing is like when you start looking at floating bony masses like scapulas and even to some degree part of the hip complexes, right? I kind of treat them like they're bevel gears. So they're sort of interlocking meshing gears, but you can quickly chat GPT that these days, right? There is a rhythm, they're codes, right? Because when you start looking at how gears are designed and orientated, there's like ratios. There's so many teeth, and how many teeth are within that meshing gives you how many locking codes there are and unlocking codes. So the body is much like this. You have a bunch of different joints and mechanisms that are essentially just access to codes. And it can be binary in ways that you're looking at it, depends on what lens, but there are ways to experiment with inputs and outputs, right? There's a whole bunch of them. So, this is something I'm kind of toying around with, because with each one of these like bevel gears orientations, you end up with a bunch of different orientations. Or I would say orientations, but then within each orientations, you have certain utilities. Now, I believe there can be is finding the right amount of inputs to getting the right kind of outputs. So, like here I'm just kind of fucking around where my scapulas need to be. So, that kind of behind my spine, that gets the retraction, that gets the depression, and then from here, I get an elevation. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so. What I was trying to do there is just engage them in a way that was conducive to an output that serves a dynamic purpose. So it kind of in a similar sort of sense, back here, you know what I mean? So the same thing with the shoulder, rather than thinking of the kick. Here's my same position. These are all kind of geared off what's happening here. Same position, this comes back, drops, and then up. You know what I mean? So it's like the same shit. It's the same thing that we're kind of, it's just in timing. When you're not moving and you're stationary, this becomes very mechanical. It becomes very binary in the sense because you're not accounting for forces. Moving something up overhead is very mechanical. So rather than the shoulder being fixed and a pivot point, you now have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. How many movements are going to take place here? When you are like moving, it doesn't come as that. They're just waypoints. It's almost like points on a map of. If you ever look up how a tuner will map a program for a fuel curve in a car, it's just points, and then the graph runs through it in terms of its ramp rate. So it's much the same thing, right? So I approach this in an engineering sense because it's the fastest route to understanding the concepts. This part here, you kind of have to be able to apply it to in a mechanical lens to understand the concept, to then heighten your senses to these things, right? So statically, when you're not moving, you're not dealing with any forces that have to run through your body. The best that you can do is like apply different inputs into your architecture to feel how like you either become heavier or lighter, dependent on your orientation of your chassis and then how your organs sit relative to this fashion. It's slightly electrical and it's slightly like this, but when you're like dealing with like the whole dynamic of this thing starts to change. You know what I mean? It's not the same process anymore. You don't have these maps. You don't have these points anymore. It's now fluid through a curve. Through fluid through a curve, and if there's disruption, that curve gets interrupted. So, you know, these are part of these things that require a bit of vision and understanding that that's what your body is designed to do in its architecture. This is all programmed by DNA. We didn't really have a choice in terms of what we're constructed of. Those are our boundaries. And within those boundaries, as you know, you need boundaries in order to explore freedoms. Something contained in a boundary is your freedom. That's all the freedom you have. Outside of this is chaos. Understanding that like your genetic boundaries, you know, like you can't change your bone into adamantine. You're always going to be living with bone. You know, your collagen and your tendons are always going to be tendons. Your red tissue is always going to be red tissue. They can be adapted. Your boundaries within that can change, but it doesn't change what they're like. You have all of them that are mechanically disposed to being, or predisposed to behaving and orientating in such a way. However, when you're understanding that like this stuff is in code, this stuff is in working with the dynamics of physics, we tend to forget that like our environment of ourself isn't finished within like the edge of my toes and my feet to my hands. It's essentially your entire environment around you. You're very sensitive to these things, and it's like unless you can start to change your mental model and your mind map that these are the things that that critically affect your health and your well-being, the scope doesn't really change. You have to take all of this into account, you know, and what it is that you are and what you're capable of doing and expressing these things. And you're gonna have to fuck around and find out. You're gonna have to create some sort of desire and agency to understanding what it is that you want in a compass that ultimately will have to come down to your own imagination and desire and not fall into someone else's expectations or map, because your reality is ultimately your own. It's not mine, it's not your parents, it's not anybody else's, unless you choosily make it so. You know, your bodies are incredibly, incredibly intelligent. You know, there's so much within our programming in our DNA that is innate, that just needs the right attention, I may say. Attention in order to be expressed. And part of this of the journey is understanding that like due to conditioning, and that's physical or mental, emotional, whatever sort of thing, due to conditioning, right? You're gonna play to those easily low expenditure mental models as a default. So until you can come to your own agency to wanting to explore these things, a lot of these things can present, and this is like, a lot of these things that we're trying to express here are actually features of our biology, right? They're features of our biology. But this is where it can kind of get a little bit confusing for some, especially in their journey with these things. Because the mental conditioning is so heavily dominant in here. This is our equilibrium. For many people, they've lost equilibrium here. It's all here, mental, psychological. That's where the equilibriums are. And that's not anybody's fault, really. It gets confusing to knowing what is a feature or a bug. You know, a bug can present as a feature, and a feature can present as a bug. And what I mean by that is something that is featureable can sometimes be thought of as a mistake or something that's bad for you. And likewise, like a bug, right, can be presented as something good, right, when it's clearly like not good for you. And you'll find out in the long run whether or not that's going to be, not even in the long run, you just know, you know, and we all know what that's like. We try and do the best things for ourselves. We eat the right sort of stuff, or at least what we think, the best that we can. We try and exercise in the best way that we can. Only to find out like the type of loads and the programming and the codes that we're putting in our bodies are actually destroying us slowly. So they're not features, they're bugs, right? So that's what I mean by that, you know? But until you can come to the point where you decidedly think to yourself, how long do I want to last? What does this vessel want me, what do I want this vessel to serve? Am I tuned into it or not? Do I want to be embodied in myself? How do I want to experience this world? How do I want to experience this life? I have to use this body at the moment to talk to you. I have to use it in ways that I can communicate my ideas. You know? Verbally and non-verbally. I want to go places and I want to do shit. I need a body to do that. I need a body of clarity. I need high signals. I need to tune into shit. Right? I need to be highly sensitive to certain things, but I also have to understand how to create boundaries within that sensitivity so I can remain in freedom and not out of chaos. It can't pull me out of that container. Right? So you need a strong body to do this shit. And you need to be tuned into it to understand what the world is offering and what it's trying to do to dampen the signals to yourself. Right? Because, like, that is a life lesson on its own. And if you can start to figure that out on yourself, you're probably going to be a couple steps ahead. So, you know, understand that your body's highly evolved. I mean, if you're a cynic, you're probably not going to think so, but I like to be on the positive side of stuff. I'd rather be positive in these things to try and fail it. I know it sounds odd that like I'd be positive. Look, what I mean by that's like I have a positive idea on or an imagery on something, and I negatively try and fail it. I'm seldom wrong with this stuff. Like the more I try and fail something, once I see a vision of something like that, I tend to not fail with it. It expresses something and then it just leaves other options open. It gives me more codes to kind of deal with, right? So this is the gift of the body. This is the gift of being embodied. This is the gift of understanding that sometimes sometimes you just can't escape it, you know? But what attention. I won't even say self-care or love, you know, because I think that comes with the rest of it, but just what attention are you giving yourself, you know? Because the body will tell you, it'll tell you what's up. All the time. All the time. It doesn't fucking lie, you know? The mind gaslights yourself into thinking that it could be otherwise, but your body will tell you all the time where you're at, what you're dealing with, and what's capable. Well, let's play with this. Let's see how the scapular rhythm wants to roll with this. Alright, see? Let's gear on that. We're going to go back here and then, ooh, this is going to be nice. And then that one tucks in. Go there. So, floating bones. That was a roundabout frickin' way of going about understanding how these codes and things work. Look, you just get better at arithmetic. I understand at the beginning, you create a fulcrum and you just row in the old traditional manner. Here we go, scapular tract pull. And eventually at that point, you really realize that like you have so much more capacity to add, I wouldn't even call it complexities, freedoms. It's freedoms, you know what I mean? It's total more freedoms to move in expression, yeah? Just dance in life. Have some fun, fucking play.